Hi, everyone. So excited to be here. Thank you so much for coming again today to the show. We already have one comment right at the crack of dawn or the crack of the starting gun. It's Omar M., who has Zoom party and is just a wonderful individual. I would take this opportunity to reach out to people you don't know and want to know, make connections with them, and if there's really strong alignment, see if you can put together a Zoom call and really start building with the activity we're generating today. The word of the day is integrity, something that's primary to all quality relationships. And my guest with me today, my ongoing guest host, is Karl Dakin, who has his show that precedes this every Tuesday, primarily involved with funding and activities related to funding. So I know Karl now for quite a while and work very closely with Karl. So I am a big pro, promoter of Karl for not only what he does for his show and our show, but what opportunities one can build together with. Very long opening there. Chat's open. We depend on chat to get us rolling and make us as relevant as possible. Wouldn't have a show without Carrie's joke. How to make a Frankfurter laugh? Just tell it it's a Polish sausage joke. Okay, well, that's a good start. A little bit early for Polish sausage out here in Colorado, but maybe just the right time if you're out on the East Coast. With that said, Karl, please share a little bit about yourself to the people who don't know you and your first thoughts on integrity.
So yes, thanks Don for having me as a guest again, and the opportunity to have one of these interesting conversations. For those of you who don't know me, I provide services as a capital coach. I work primarily with small businesses and community projects to help them figure out how to raise capital, from whom to raise capital, all the mechanics, regulatory issues that go into that. I'm currently working on about a dozen different projects that are anywhere from very early, we'd like to raise money, where do we go for a gold mine in Colorado, to more advanced projects that we may be launching here in maybe in the next 30 days for a couple of different things, dealing with communities, people coming together, trying to achieve something as a group that they couldn't do individually, trying to raise the bar, the quality of life within a geographic area or for a particular age group. And in each case, where we're trying to raise funding to do more, to do better, we have to ask the question of who's involved, who cares, how do we tell the story, how do we place that story in front of these people who have an interest so that we can all work together to make things better. And that brings us to our topic of today of integrity, because when you ask somebody for funding, it generally better be encompassed or ensconced within a relationship where integrity exists and integrity has been established. Because otherwise, all you're doing is handing money to someone with no idea of what's going to happen, and that's not something people commonly do. And having been worked in the fundraising industry for 4.5 decades, I have a number of business failures, funding failures that I've had to work with. And if you don't have integrity, you don't get invited back to the party again. You're one and done, and they move on because they're saying, well, yeah, you took my money. What happened with it? Well, if you can show them that it was put to use as described and applied in a reasonable, straightforward fashion, then they're going, okay, you good job, best effort. It didn't turn out. I'm okay with that. Not everybody's okay with that, but enough people are okay with that that I get to go out and work with other people to help them raise funding. So it's been a long-term key concern for me on how do I present myself, how do I show people that I do care, I respect other people's money, I'm not here, there, gone tomorrow, and even when we can't make it work, it was still a good effort, and that justifies giving it another try.
Yeah, well, that's great. I think it gives people a lot of insight into elements that relate to integrity. Integrity typically, in most people's minds, applies to character, which specifically applies to honesty and straightforwardness. And that applies to elements too. So, people's projections, are they have integrity? It doesn't have to be dishonest, but some things are not as clear, some things are a little opaque, and some things have integrity but need definition for those who don't understand it. So, I think the key is to be as clear as possible. What I've learned over time is nobody likes surprises, good or bad. So, they just want to know what it is and be able to work from there versus someone who paints a pretty picture and then has a hard time filling it in the future. Or, integrity to yourself is not painting a picture that's worse than it has to be, but just real and genuine. So some people overshoot, some people are a little too modest. Typically, the way to get through it is to have a multiple range of numbers if you're dealing with financials. So, at best case, average case, maybe not worst case, but not best case. And then naturally, you get into issues and challenges that may come up. Some things are uncontrollable, like acts of God, weather situations, economic situations that you had no control over. But a lot of it is just the way you communicate it, which kind of gives people comfort in their ability to trust your word, trust your vision, trust your numbers, because trust is everything. And that's the challenge for people who lose integrity along the way. It's really difficult to gain that trust back. It's one of the hardest things to achieve and one of the easiest things to lose. And a lot of things are just because of misunderstanding. And that's why clarity makes so much sense. And who is here but our good friend Kelly? Kelly's just the best. I keep saying that because it's true. So it must be true if I keep saying that and keep saying it's true. Kelly has her show, The Awesome Journey, and with Christy Howard on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm a big fan. Try to make every show possible because not just because Kelly's part of it, and that would be enough in itself to join in, but because of the guests, the interesting conversations, and the lessons learned. And I think that's what's so important about even shows like live streams is the integrity of the guest, of the information, of the intent. And, you can't lose by having high integrity. And I think that's so important. And some people will look at integrity and give you some points for it, for disclosing as much as necessary, for taking their thoughts and questions into consideration. And that's also a great building block for future relationships. And to Karl's point, on the other side of the coin, when you do really well and you perform and you show up and you keep to your word, you're more inclined to get some more opportunities with that party or referrals. So, there's more to it than just the one thing you're doing. It's the relationship you could be building. With that said, Karl.
Yeah, so a couple things I'd like to follow up on. We talk about building trust, and integrity is essentially a part of that trust relationship. And as you described it, it takes time to build up. I had as a guest on my show yesterday, Successful Funding, Ron Yeager, who, like me, has kind of been there, done that, wears many hats. And we were talking about how long it takes to build a relationship between a person brand new to get to a point where they're comfortable. They have enough sense of confidence in what you're doing that they may be willing to make an investment. And it's usually a period of months. And he described one situation where he's known people since 2018, and they go, well, do you need funding? He goes, yes, but not yet. He kept going, this project is high risk until we knock down some of these risks. It's inappropriate for me to ask you for money. And by doing that, he's demonstrating integrity because he's not looking out for himself. He's looking out for the other person. And this is something that all too often I think we're missing in day-to-day communications is that you have to ask, what is it that the other person's going to benefit? How are you can help them, or how could you potentially hurt them if you do something that they can't handle? If I ask somebody to go run a mile right now with me, there are certain people I wouldn't ask because I know they can't do it. And it would be harmful for me to ask them or expect them to do that. It's the same thing as asking somebody to invest. If I say, well, I need 10,000 for a project, but I know this person's got 10,000 in their retirement fund, they need it for retirement, it would be wrong for me to ask them to invest in that particular opportunity because it's an inappropriate risk for them to take. And so as I go through, talking with people, it's more like a consultative sales approach where I need to know them, understand them, where they're at, where they're coming from, what's appropriate for them from an investment standpoint. And even though I'm not advising them, I'm not a wealth advisor, I have to take on part of that responsibility to not ask them to do something that's not good for them. And you see this across the board. And I use an example of two spam emails I got this morning where they assumed that they're good for me, that I should talk to them, I should drop everything I'm doing and go buy their services. And the fact that they don't know me, have not taken into consideration my needs or my background, I immediately do spam block and I'm not talking to them anymore. The fact that they disrespect me from the very first moment of our contact uh, does not give me a sense of integrity as to their character, their knowledge, their competence. And I do set the bar high because I'm working with involvement of long-term investment opportunities. And I can't deal with people who are here today, gone tomorrow, grass is always greener. It's all about me kind of a conversation. It's not anything I can really tolerate. And sometimes I offend people because I am pretty black and white on that particular type of a topic. But I think integrity is that common element in trust. And you can establish that by being respectful of the other person, understanding them, and looking out for their interest is one of the best ways to both have integrity and to show integrity.
Yeah, that's so important. A lot of the points you just made, because if you take the word integrity, a lot of times it relates to strength. So, in other words, does the bridge have integrity? Is a way you could say it. Is what's the foundation here? What's holding this thing up? What can I depend on? Right? So, dependability and reliability goes a lot further towards credibility. Once people find you credible and reliable and strong in your vision and in your ability to communicate your vision, I think where people sometimes go astray is they're already a couple steps ahead of everybody else they're about to talk to. They already know what they want to do. They already know how they want to do it. They already know, hopefully, who they want to do it with and how much money they're going to be attracting. New person coming along has none of this in mind, right? So if you start out with, hey, you want to do something, I'm doing, here's what I'm doing, it's like you caught them kind of off guard. Most people will get surprised or stunned and back off or feel intimidated versus, hey, let's get to know each other. And then from let's get to know each other, let's get to do something together with each other. And I've talked with Karl about this and other people. now that we're on LinkedIn and doing live streaming, the key to everything is really being able to bring people to a cooperative opportunity. Traditionally on LinkedIn, you see somebody, you attract yourself for them to you, and you make a connection, which is very simple, and your chance of success is pretty high. So with that, the next step would be, well, let's have a Zoom, which is a step up. But most people going into a Zoom have had plenty of Zooms. What happens in a Zoom? Well, you learn more about each other, somewhat impressed, might even say, hey, I just love what you're doing. I think you got it going, but I'm selling shoes, you're selling insurance. I don't see anything that we could do together right now. And that's how it stands. And then what happens 6 months or a year or even sooner goes by? Hey, let's have a catch-up call. Well, you have a catch-up call and you catch up and you're still not going anywhere. You just got to know each other a lot better and maybe enjoy talking with someone, but it's not going to your priority, interest. But if you can connect with somebody who you want to talk to on an extended basis in front of a quality audience, now you can say, let's have a live stream together. They will look at that as a positive. First of all, most people don't know live streaming, haven't done a lot of it, and if they have, they may not have been experiencing a quality live stream. And once they get on, they can see the vehicle, the medium, and now you've got an exchange of peers coming together for a program and that purpose, not for an opportunity. So no one has to get their checkbook out. Nobody has to make a decision. And if it works, now there's a way of expanding that relationship on live streaming to the point where you can even create subject matter that relates to your opportunity or their opportunity or some mutual situation. And now you're becoming a partner in collaboration, which would then set the foundation for getting to know what everybody's doing, getting to know a little bit more specifically of how they're doing it, and then gives you an opportunity to say, well, here's a talent I have or a skill set I think I can bring to the table, or a resource. Might be finance, it might be referrals, it might be whatever, but at least you're stair-stepping it in the right direction versus throwing stuff out, hoping it sticks. If it does, how do you scale that? And then what anybody does for you, that's how they're going to be doing it with you, right? So if it's embarrassing or put office, if that's a good word, you can decide and nobody gets hurt feelings. Because if you do a show with somebody and it's not exactly going where you want to, well, you did a show with somebody, it's a positive in itself. If you dive into something with somebody and you find out, wow, this is what I thought it was, now you're a little more entrenched. Now it's a little more uncomfortable to back out of it. And you ask yourself, why didn't I know more going in? And I think the big word is qualifying and having an approach that allows people to get to know each other before having to make a decision, and having a mutual opportunity to decide what that next step will be. So here's another. Carrie didn't think I shared the first joke, but I'll share the second joke. A catch-up call would be messy with all those tomatoes. Yeah, I guess so. I understand the catch and the catch-up. So, Karl, I know with all this experience you've had, there had to be a learning curve involved for you to get to the point to say, hey, this is working. I learned from what wasn't working, and I continue to evolve and adjust. So at what point in your career did you start to get clarity of not only purpose, but finding the right group to match the right opportunities that you may be participating in?
Well, I would have to say that I recognized about 20 years into my career that I wasn't going the direction I wanted to go. At that time, I was wearing my lawyer hat. I was acting as kind of a comprehensive advisor to small businesses, and I was helping them with a variety of things. But I kept finding myself wanting my clients to do better, and I couldn't seem to be able to help them get beyond themselves. So they were either too new, too young, too inexperienced, or they weren't the right fit. Bad relationship where I couldn't add much value. So I started to strike off on my own and look at how I could be maybe the leader, the champion. It wasn't the word I was using at the time, but I was trying to have more control over my own destiny, so to speak. And I spent several years looking, talking, trying out different organizations, different methods, different approaches to how you do different things. And I will say it's an ongoing process. There are days I wake up and I think I'm just getting started on this learning curve, despite all the years, decades that I already have under my belt. Um, but it got to a point where um, you realize that it isn't the product or service that you're trying to sell. It isn't the business that you're trying to launch or to make successful. Ultimately, what happens is you're providing value to someone else. And that value may be in the form of a product or service. It may be in the way that you interact with people on your team and bringing that product or service to market. And oh, by the way, it may be the way that you interact with everyone in your community who is impacted by what you're doing. Sometimes we get the feeling that we're the Lone Ranger, and that's an old reference to an old TV show for you young people, but it it's a statement that you think you're all by yourself, and you get a sense that maybe you are all by yourself. But anytime you do anything, anytime you buy a product, anytime you buy a service, anytime you make a product or you do anything, there's a ripple effect, and it may be so minor that it's almost impossible to measure. But when you look at a community collectively, which is a lot of small businesses, a lot of programs, and so forth, you can kind of see an ecosystem where these things all benefit from each other. And you start to have a better understanding that everything you do is having a consequence, it's having an impact. And then with that, then you can choose whether or not you want to make that better or neutral, or it's not something that you're going to take any action on. And so I would say I spent a good 10 years circling around, going through stuff that um, kind of brought me to the point where I thought I had a better understanding of money, funding, its impact, and where I fit into that overall system of helping primarily startup small businesses, high tech, innovative companies move out and do new things. And I was primarily focused on technology when I started because that's where I came from. But I started recognizing that in something like funding of workforce housing, I could be extraordinarily innovative. I could do things that haven't been done yet. We're still trying to implement some of these ideas, but I could have a greater impact by what I knew and how to make things work. And that's something that is appealing to me, that I can make a greater contribution to my community, to the people I'm working with, make better use of my own skills and talents. And so I'm at a point of trying to verify, validate this by working with different companies, different clients, different projects that I think will have greater value to everybody I know, everybody around me.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And well, really quickly, Jason Gerardo is here, one of our wonderful family members who's usually here with Dave Snell and has been appearing with Kelly, really getting to mix it up. And always appreciate Jason, wonderful gentleman. One Path Coaching is his company. And I recommend anybody to Jason, because Jason has proven himself to have really high integrity. And I know when we talk about words, we tend to put it in the context of funding, but integrity is really something, again, that people look at and feel they can depend on you, can have confidence in you, and build trust with you. And one of the first integrity elements is punctuality. That's an easy way of looking at it, because when someone's late, and again, it depends on the person, but when someone's late, they're making the other person late too, right? So if you have a 9 o'clock call and you're there at 5 to 9 or even at 9, and they show up at 5 after 9, well, that puts your schedule 5 minutes off. So it's not just an isolated singular event, it's a tandem situation. And every minute you wait that they're late makes you feel less excited about being with them, whether it's on a Zoom or something else. And, some things can't be helped, but that's where, once you know, and I think that's a key component of integrity, you share. If you're going to be 5 minutes late and a half hour before that, then you're better off sharing that a half hour before that, so you're not really late. What you actually do is resetting it, or giving the person the opportunity a half hour before to say, no, it's not going to work 5 minutes late. It's going to encroach something I'm into. So let's reschedule. But, there's a lot of people who tend to ask for forgiveness and not permission, right? So they figure they can just sneak it in, or it's already there, and get through it. But, intuitive or even sensitive people can pick up on that. And it also says that you care more about your situation than my situation. And if you're coming into it equally, you're going through it unequally. And some things will never be said or told to you, because some people just say, I'm not going to even explain this or correct someone, right? It's not my job, and it's just going to waste more of my time. And it just tells you what to expect. And I think that's important. So whatever you say, try to do and do as best as you can. Even if you can't get there, run it out. In baseball, no matter, everybody looks down at a player that just, hits the ball right to a person, knowing that they're going to get thrown out and they got a long run. But it looks so bad to turn around, go back to the dugout without even trying. Because first of all, you're an athlete. Running is something you do. It shouldn't be an inconvenience. You don't run the plate that often. And there are instances where someone flubs the ball or throws it over the first baseman, and you could have got on base. So I think it's effort and intention that also goes a long way towards credibility and integrity, because, everyone wants to know what happened, right? And if you really say, well, I did all this, I tried this, and I took a bus, and I took a train, I took a plane, I did everything I could, and I still came up short. Well, you're putting the effort in. You were innovative. You didn't decide, well, I was a little late, I decided to have another cup of coffee and forget about it. Because, when you're building anything, a relationship, people have to look at you as a model and as a precedent. Too many people have had that position of do as I say, not as I do, or I don't have to do that anymore, but you need to, and what you're doing is setting up divisions and separations and insulation between you and them, because usually they'll say, well, if you don't have to do it, then something else, I don't have to do it. And pretty soon you're dumbing down together, versus correcting somebody. And a lot of people, and it's a responsibility on both shoulders, a lot of people don't know what's important to you until you share it, if it is important to you. And once people recognize it, now it's their responsibility to respect it, or just say, I can't do that. If you want something like that to be happy, I can't make you happy like that. And that's okay, because you're always better off finding out early than late. No sense putting good time and good money after something that's not very satisfying. And really starts to diminish the opportunity, because as you think less of somebody, you think less of everything involved with somebody. On the other side, if someone's really coming through and making things happen and surprising you on providing more and more value than you anticipated, then you're going to be more interested in how much more can we do, because the groundwork has been laid. The person has kind of shown and proven themselves to be such a person of integrity. And that takes the fear away, because most people don't mind losing. If, to Karl's point, you did everything you said you were going to do, you did whatever you could do, and it didn't work out, well, that's investing. It wouldn't be investing if there wasn't risk, and there wouldn't be reward if there wasn't risk to compensate for that. And I think maturity goes a long way, and I think people who've had experience are in a better position than some younger people who are just getting going, and they get too ambitious in their projections and their visions, and especially in their capabilities. And who wants to put themselves up to the highest standard possible right at the beginning? Wouldn't it be nice to have a little breathing room and say, hey, instead of 3 months, I can do it in 6 months, and stretch it out. Instead of making major investments up front, make small incremental investments to test things, and then come in with the bigger load that you might be able to apply to it. So there's a lot of strategy involved, and there's a lot of experience. And that's one reason to engage somebody like Karl, is someone who's been through that enough times with enough people that could be a great advisor, counselor, and add and complement to what you are doing. And maybe a twist here and a pivot there makes a presentation sparkle. And also, having some fresh eyes and ears can kind of give you a test to who you're going to be presenting to. It's better to go through a couple rehearsals with someone and get their opinion, and maybe they'll say, hey, everything's perfect, I love what you're doing, and then you get validation. Other cases, well, there is something I see as a gap here. Maybe you've got an answer, and maybe it's me who hasn't seen it, or maybe I've got a question you haven't really realized, and that could make a big difference. So I guess everything about integrity is related to how you communicate and how you stand up for what you commit to. So what's your thoughts in that regard, Karl?
Well, I was on a conversation this morning with Kathy Terraccioni, who is building a very interesting community for elderly women. And we were talking about this thing about punctuality and being on time. I shared with her a story from when I was in college, and I was a member of the rowing club. And a couple of us were late to practice one morning, and the coach uh, gave us a learning episode with a raised voice, but we'll skip over that part. But the point he was making to us is we were late, and we're thinking, wow, we're only 5 minutes late. It's no big deal. But we were part of a team, and our 5 minutes late was multiplied by every other member of the team. So collectively, we were over an hour and a half late for the entire team to do what it needed to do. And it was a lesson that stuck with me, is that anytime you say that you're going to be late, if it's a one-on-one, yes, maybe you're only disrespecting the one person you're going to meet with. But quite commonly, it's never one-on-one. You're part of a team, a larger effort, a larger anything. So if you say, hey, I'm going to get you that document on Monday, and everybody else has to wait till you deliver that document, the entire project is delayed if you're not punctual, if you can't perform. And so it's very important, as we do almost anything, to consider all the ripples that can come from our action or our failure to act, as we said, when we said. And I give a lot of tolerance, or I'll call it slack, to younger people who are still trying to find their way, trying to figure out what their true capabilities are. which are changing every day. So it isn't like it's a constant. And so if somebody young comes to me and says, I'm going to create the next Google or Facebook, I try to gracefully adjust their expectations to something that they may actually be able to accomplish. But when I get into an older person who's been there, done that, I would like a little more precision in their forecasting of what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And this is it's part of the integrity thing, is to recognize your own capabilities, your own knowing when you're reaching a little bit beyond your current comfort zone, or whether you're reaching over your head. Letting the other person know, I've never done this before. It's one of the things I've got to do today, is I've been asked to explain where I fit into a project that is in formation. And I can play like 20 different roles in this, but some of them I can do blindfolded because I've been there, done that so many times. And other ones, I know what needs to be done, but I've never done it. So I can't claim any level of expertise. I need to let them know that, because as we put the team together, they may choose to find someone who does have that experience, and that's the right decision. But they can't make that decision unless I'm open and transparent about who I am, what I can do, and I'm candid about where I feel comfortable or uncomfortable participating on a particular team. And quite often these days, people will come to me and say, can you do it? I said, I can, but either it's going to cost you too much, or I think you're reaching too far, you're going too fast, and you need to go back, maybe even to the drawing board, and rethink everything you're doing. Because I'm very concerned, based on my experience, that you're not going to be happy with the outcome. So integrity is a little bit of understanding who you are, being able to communicate that so other people can work with you, around you, or past you, as it serves their own purpose, their own needs. And I think that's hard for a lot of people. They don't want to let people down. I have friends who have told me everything I wanted to hear and then constantly let me down. And it's a difficult relationship at that point, because then you get into a lack of trust a lot, because they're not having integrity about their own capabilities. And as I build teams and work with different projects, this is part of the learning process: is you ask, test until you reach that level where you go, I feel comfortable they can do what they say they're going to do within the time frame. And even with the ordinary challenges that we'll all face as we roll out a new project, I think we can still get there on time, within the schedule that we all agreed upon. And that's very hard when you're brand new. You don't know someone, you don't know what they're capable of, and you don't know how honest they're going to be with you about what they can or can't do. And so the testing is, can you do this? And you start in small steps to see if you can work towards a point where you go, I can turn my back on them. I don't have to worry about them. They're going to perform beautifully without me watching, monitoring, behaving, or standing ready to step into what they're going to do. So there's so many things that go into a relationship, but understanding, why people care, what they need, where they're coming from, their capabilities, all go into that mix.
Yeah, and when you look at integrity, a lot of it has to do with the reasons why someone wasn't able to um, rise to the occasion. I mean, how many times, and I used to be that kind of person that would leave just enough time to get to the airport. And, if you're on I-70 here in Colorado and things bunch up, especially before Waze, where it can tell you a little bit of what's in front of you, you ask yourself, what were you doing that half hour or 45 minutes while you're waiting to leave? And if you start reading the paper or watching TV or fooling around, and all of a sudden you put yourself in a unnecessary position that, hey, people sometimes are afraid they're going to give too much. They're afraid that, wow, what if I get there 5 or 10 minutes early and now I got to wait for the other person? Well, isn't that better not to have to squeeze the steering wheel really hard, get yourself stressed out, get to the airport just in time, rush to the gate, and for what? And not only that, is it repeats itself. And until you miss a plane, and I actually, I'll share an experience. I actually missed a plane, maybe two, but one that stands in my mind. And I was actually going out and I was in New York raising some capital. And I had an investment banker that took the role on. And we actually had a later flight. We got done. We were actually at the World Trade Center that day for something, and decided, hey, we can make the earlier flight. He was flying to San Francisco. I was flying to Denver. Anyways, we get in a cab, and the guy races through things, jumping on curbs, and somehow we got to the airport in time. Somehow we cut in line, or we raised our hand, says our plane's taking off in like 10 minutes, and they told us, okay, come to the front. Got everything worked out. Finally got to the gate. I call my wife up to say, hey, I'm taking an earlier plane, and I see the door shut. You can't, once the door shuts, they're not opening it, not for me at least. And I'm like, geez, look at all the time, trouble, rushing. And I had to make a phone call. I didn't have to, actually. But it re-instilled in me that when you're doing something, don't think of anything else but what you're doing, and get there early. Might have been easier just to take the later flight, because I ended up taking a connecting flight through Chicago, which got me into Denver like 2 a.m. But the point is learn from your mistakes, find ways to make it easy on yourself and everybody around you. I mean, if you have a flat tire on the road, that's something you couldn't anticipate. But, then again, if you would have left a half hour early, you might have been able to get the tire fixed and still made it, because I think what we're dealing with is having contingency plans. Even when you're raising capital, there should be contingency. Well, if this doesn't work, here's our backup plan. If this party doesn't work, here's who we can introduce ourselves to. You don't want to always have the one and done, one only initiative. And then you don't want to be the person who screwed it up, right? Because that, you can almost forgive yourself. But like Karl had mentioned, if there's 7 other people involved, and let's say you missed a plane because you had a meeting later that day that you had to make, now you missed the meeting. Now you disappointed everybody. And you ask yourself, this wasn't necessary. And how do I make it so I have more room? And plus, if you're going to be sitting at home, why not be sitting at the airport? It's the same sitting. You could read that newspaper when you're there. You could watch that TV show when you're there. And it also shows resourcefulness, because people are looking at not only what you're sharing with them, but what is going to be in the future when situations come up and you cut it too short. And it could be time, it could be investment. And then what's your organization going to think? I knew a guy who worked at a very high-end position in a very high-end company, and the chairman would lock the door at 9 a.m. if there was a 9 a.m. meeting. And it didn't matter who was outside the door, they weren't getting in. And you think, well, that's kind of oppressive. But hey, it was his way of saying, we made the meeting, I'm here, we're here, you're not. Take care of it yourself from now on, And I think, again, what you do is what you model for other people to do. Once it's okay for someone to come in 5 minutes late, then it must be okay for everybody to come in 5 minutes late. Now, I think if you're knocking on the door and it's 1 minute, I would have the generosity to say it's a minute, possibly, if it was like 5 or 10. But again, it's up to individual taste. The other thing is you're doing business, you're thinking, you're communicating. anything that makes you distracted, anything that brings your spirits down is going to make your performance less. You know, if you just had an argument at home and you go right to a meeting, you're going to carry some of that with you. And a lot of people, especially high performance people, have a routine, how they get ready every day. You know, they might have some exercise, they may have some nutrition involved, but they want to be at peak performance in every area of their senses. And they come in ready to go. And that's really key too to integrity is, are you just that person who doesn't know, not only go to second mile, never goes to first mile, and somehow allows yourself to roll into it? Those are tough, because personal integrity is something everybody can have. Financial wherewithal and experience is something you have to gain over time. And I think integrity is also thinking as much or more about the other people involved, where you cover yourself and then you did something for them. Who gets all the benefit when someone says, I just on the way stopped off, got a dozen chocolate chip cookies for everybody here, right? I mean, it's maybe $6, maybe a 10 minutes in and out of a grocery store, and you got the things, but all of a sudden, like, wow, they did take the time, they did think, and they did care about us, even though it's just chocolate chip cookies and everybody could do it if they wanted to. But who's thinking about that little extra touch, that extra flair that makes people remember you as, hey, he was the guy, you know, that did something I wasn't expected on the plus side. You know, I know in the past, people used to make a big deal about making sure they remember all of everybody's information. So if someone says, well, I'm having a wedding anniversary in 2 weeks, and they made a note, next time they talked to them, they would say, well, how was your anniversary? And somebody would say, well, they were listening and they remembered and they cared enough to ask me about it. And those are things you can reinforce yourself with when you are starting out. And the other thing is, integrity is saying, I don't know. You know, or somebody asks you a question and say, be honest, I have no idea. I hope that doesn't blow this thing up, but it is what it is. And most people would say, well, at least you're honest, you know, and that's another thing about people who take responsibility. And I think that's part of integrity, is everybody can make an excuse and everybody can point the finger. Well, if Jane would have got me to work in time, I would have been able to get well, Jane is Jane and you are you. And, you know, I believe everybody should admit shared responsibility, you know, and if someone gets upset by being honest and by taking responsibility, well, you know who you're dealing with, and you have to make a decision. Can you accommodate this? And some people, you know, there's people who say, well, there's some things I would never do for as much money in the world, but they've never been offered as much money in the world, you know, and the people who decide, hey, that is so foreign to my belief system or my character, I don't care. It's not worth it, you know, and I think that's where integrity, and one last thing is, integrity is typically what you do in the dark, you know, when no one knows, no one sees what you're doing, you know, and you can decide, hey, do I want to shortcut this? Do I want to try and get away with this? And there are people who have they're into a labor of love, let's say. You know, one more example, I had a really, really significant CFO, great guy. He was a CFO of a major retailer in Denver back in the 80s. And he was like a Renaissance man. And he would make his own wine, his own beer. And as a hobby, he would restore old cars, like from the 20s and 30s. And he once told me, he says, you'll never see an ounce of plastic in any of these cars. He actually went to school to learn how to use lead, because that's how those cars were made or restored, right? And he said to me, he says, you know, I would be the only person to know if I had put something inside that wasn't, but I couldn't live with myself if that was the case. I couldn't afford to have anything artificial. And I said to myself, well, you've got principle, you've got integrity. And, there's a last saying, I think it's Shakespeare. It says, if you're not true to yourself, you can't be true to anybody else. So it has to start with yourself. Commitments you make to yourself, you should carry through. Things that are important, you should reflect in what you do and how you do it. What's your new thoughts, Karl, after about 12 of those thoughts?
Well, I like your example of the chairman who locks the door at 9 o'clock. I appreciate his desire to have everybody in the room, but I'm going to cross integrity a little bit over into the concept of leadership. I've sat through too many meetings where I didn't need to be in the room. There was no purpose for me being there. And it was a waste of my time and person I'm working with and everything else. And as I work with teams, which are all different, the question when you come into that meeting is, how are you going to work with every single other person in the meeting? So if that chairman is coming in and just, basically making an announcement that they could have done with an email, they're not being respectful of everybody else in the room. It's more like I'm in charge and I got to show off. Where if there's something going to happen, they should walk in the room and go, Joe, you need to do this because of this, and Sally, you need to do this because of that. And everyone in the room is basically being engaged and utilized, and they're being a demonstration of respect for who they are in their job. So the next time that you're in a meeting, consider from a leadership standpoint, even if you're not the leader, but you're part of that team, is how are you helping everybody else move forward their part of all this, and what do you have for them when you talk to them? Or so you're saying, this is something I think we should do. How would we go about doing it? And this is a skill that everybody needs to evolve and take place. But again, it's showing integrity because of not only do I know who I am, but I'm knowing who else is in the room, and I'm trying to help them be all they can be, quite selfishly, so I can be all I can be. But understanding, knowing them and where they're at, so if somebody doesn't get their job done, I go, that's okay. I already had somebody else do it. Or I already bumped into her in the hall and I said, hey, you don't want to get caught out again being singled out as a person who's holding the entire team back. Is there anything I can do to help? But this is that kind of open-minded sensitivity to everyone around you and what they're doing, because that is a part of your demonstrating that you appreciate and respect them in turn.
Absolutely. And it brings so many memories to mind. And, when you look at an hour meeting, let's say, and you bring 10 people in the room, from other parts of the company and whatever, and let's say the average pay is $40 an hour. Well, you just invested $400 in this meeting of time. Now that the person was doing something that had to drop what they're doing to come to this meeting, which means they still have that to do. So, and in anticipation of a meeting, there's some preparation on everybody's part, if nothing else, but to think about what is going to happen and what I'm going to say. Second thing, you're cutting off activities in anticipation of the meeting. So you might have a call, have to end it short. Then when you leave the meeting, you don't just go back into your seat. You tend to gravitate with whoever was at the meeting, have a little water fountain talk, and then pretty soon it's a lunch or something else. You just killed half of a morning. And when you look at that as it's an expense, it's not free. That why not say, hey, I'm going to need you here for the first 15 minutes, right? If I need you to share the financials. In 15 minutes, you've done your part, go back to work. Another group may come in at a certain point that says, hey, you're only here for 10 or 15 minutes. And it's better to say, we're only going to use you for this much because you're essential for this much. No reason to hang out. the other thing, most people who do that are not trying to be considerate of everybody else's time or thought. They're trying to drill something down. And it typically disrespects people when you got to repeat the same thing 5 times. And not only that, usually an old meeting is a continuation of a previous meeting. So the damage continues. And after a while, people are like straining to smile when they're burning up inside. And like this is going nowhere. It's the same thing, maybe said in a different way. And sometimes you feel you have to pound it in. But again, that doesn't show much consideration for them. And then who else is participating? Are you the only speaker and everybody's suffering through it? Or is it going around the table? Are people raising their hands? I mean, Kelly always makes the point in a lot of situations as chief marketing officer, she was told going into a meeting, you're here to be seen and not heard. Right. And if someone tells me that, it's like, well, why don't you just put a picture of me up? Because if all people want to do is see who I am and what I look like, but I'm not supposed to talk, especially in a meeting that you invited me into. It's one thing to say, I may not have anything to say, or I'm not going to expand or extend this meeting any longer. It has to be. But again, to Karl's point, it's leadership. And, strong leaders will listen to their people and are actually soliciting input and feedback all the time. And, and it doesn't have to be publicly, but hey, if anybody has something to say, come into my office afterwards, or if there's better ways of improving this, I'd love to hear from you, because then it shows I care about you. I care about what you think and what you have to say, and I want to expose you in the best way. And everybody makes those mistakes, but how many people learn from them and change? Everybody's had longer, unnecessary meetings that really, they might even thought was successful because they were able to share everything they needed to, but how much of it resonated? How much of it integrated in them? And then did that create action steps and opportunities that wouldn't have happened without the meeting? And I think what everybody got a great learning experience is when everybody went home, and couldn't be in the office during COVID. And at a certain point, you say, well, gosh, I don't have to go to the cleaners. I don't have to get in my car and drive to work. I don't have to get totally dressed up every day. I don't have to park. I don't have to get to my office without talking to 3 people. And then people come in my office and it's time for a meeting, time for lunch, time for something else. And pretty soon I got 4 hours of maybe work in. And I spent hours getting home. So work now. Where if someone is at least working from home, and I'm a big advocate, but there's 2 sides to the story. Again, it depends on systems. It depends on definition. Here's what's expected. Here's what we can measure. But it's also convenience. And you want to make things comfortable for people in order to be as productive, not comfortable for people just to be as comfortable as they can. And again, it's communication. And I would rather ask more questions than give more answers. Because once you get the questions, once you get the situation, then it's much easier. So Karl, 58 minutes and 50 seconds. I'm glad that we didn't have, well, we did have about 10 people. I guess in a lot of ways, this is a meeting we call whenever we have a show. And I think that's why it's so important to recognize people, recognize their comments, appreciate them. And if you do that in every meeting, even a gratitude meeting, I want to, people love that. I want to recognize Alice. She just did something, knocked it out of the park last week, and let Alice tell you about it. And hey, those are quality meetings, but it's the meetings that, gosh, nothing's going to change. And you go into with an expectation that is going to be fulfilled. You go in, this is a total waste of time. I don't know why we keep doing this. And it's hard to get excited about a company who doesn't respect their best people and their time. So, Karl.
So anyway, I have been part of Don's cohort, his LinkedIn Live training group, which he now offers to other people, and I'm advocating for people to uh, consider Don as an expert in this area and the use of LinkedIn to help share the story. I see my participation in a program like this as a way of demonstrating who I am, a way of sharing what I know without a charge, without a fee, which is part of who I am, and hopefully will help people determine whether or not I might be a team member on a project of theirs sometime in the future. And I think it's important for people to put themselves out there, to put themselves in a public place, to consider how they can help one on many people in a most efficient fashion, like LinkedIn Live, because it stretches their horizons, their audiences, and in essence, it gives them a chance to give value to more people at the same time. And it's like any webinar or any type of one-on-many presentation, it's got that greater capability of saying I can help more than one person at one time. And so I appreciate being on the guest this morning on your show, Don, and the ability to talk about integrity. I think it's critical for people to see how they relate, interact, how they contribute to everybody around them, and then the ability, more importantly, for people to depend upon them to do what they say they're going to do when they say they're going to do it.
Well, that's so gratifying and really valuable, because I think one of the main points that you brought up today is the ripple effect. Is what you do for someone or with someone that affects other people going forward, and how you bring people together. So now in one meeting, you actually have 7 voices who are sharing 7 different insights. And it's like a buffet. Is like I can pick a little bit from Karl, I can take a little bit from Beverly, and also a heads up as to say, here's my focus. And maybe the answer isn't there that day, but people are starting to think. And when they get back to you, remember you told me you're looking for a great Italian restaurant. Well, I found one. And let me share that with you. And I know Kelly's working on this, and it looks like you've got some expertise. Let's have a call, or in the future, let's have a show. That if we have a productive time, an hour together with Ford, myself, and you, which will be Monday, how much benefit did that impact the other people watching it today and in the future? And now Ford says, well, Karl's into this. I know somebody. And because that's a real resource that you earned over time, is your relationships, your integrity with others. And if you can bring somebody of high integrity to them, well, now you've distinguished yourself, but you've also helped the person that you're introducing and helped the person that's getting the introduction. And it's lovely to have a pipeline of new tactics, new referrals, new resources. And it's just to make a note. Okay, I may not need it right now, but thank you very much, and I'll keep it in mind. Usually when someone does something in that regard for me, I'm right on it. So if Beverly says, here's 2 people I want to introduce you to, by the time I get off the call, I'm writing them to respect Beverly, because the last thing you want is Beverly to say, well, I gave you 2 great names, whatever happened? Well, I'm almost going to call them. Well, any integrity you have is going to go out the window, because you're the one who asked for it. I went out of my way or whatever to get it for you, and then you were blasé about it. They say no one hears your words, they always hear your music. If you're right there, Johnny on the spot, if you're fast, if you're excited, if you're enthusiastic, and if you promote the other person, and actually Beverly's been doing, a message with her on it and me and the person, I'd like to introduce you, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm always like, thank you so much, Beverly, for being so thoughtful. And I appreciate that, because it promotes them in front of the other person's eyes. And it also shows that that's how you do things with people who do things with and for you. So everything is a precedent, a model, possibly. Getting more out of the same is really one of the keys to leverage. So with that said, I know we're a little bit over, but we couldn't help it. We were going so fast, we couldn't slow down immediately. Had to kind of glide down. And with that, I'll be back tomorrow. Kelly will be with me. Dave will be with me too. And next week on Monday, we have Karl and Ford Sykes, who's been on the show a couple times. Fantastic individual. If you don't know him, it's a great opportunity. He's written published 300 books, is a world famous Hall of Fame speaker, and just a really wonderful guy to hang out with. So with that said, thank you, Karl. Thank you, audience. See